I want to do a bit of revisiting, okay? A few weeks ago, I posted this video. I'll put it here, put the link up there. Just a little revisiting segment on the Canon 28. I always want to find a way to talk about it because it's just a camera that I personally really enjoy. And I think that, in my mind, it encapsulates a pure truth to film photography and to one of the many avenues that someone can take, and that's why I really like it. A lot of other reasons as well, but for the most part, it's just a really concise camera. Now, I want to take that same concept of revisiting and circle back to a completely different type of camera, and that is, of course, the Nikon F3.
Nikon F3. The F3 incorporates a new metering system that works with any combination of lenses, viewfinders, and focusing screens to give you precise exposure control. The F3's durable liquid crystal display uses less energy and operates at a wider temperature range.
I've had this for about a year, thereabouts, and before that my experience with this camera was very limited. I had repaired one years ago and didn't really think much of it. At the time I was very tainted by Nikons in general because I went through a big bout of trying to repair a large box full of Nikon FEs, FMs, and thus just created this nightmarish situation of I never want to work on these again. So the Nikon F3 at the time, didn't think anything of it, and then it wasn't until a couple years later that I was repairing one, and I was just, it just kind of clicked with me. I was like shooting it, testing on all the different shutter speeds, all this stuff, and I was like, man, this is just a great camera. Like, there's just something about it. The advanced throw felt good. I really enjoy the shutter button, all this stuff, like just the fine details. Just like, man, this is a good camera to use. And then it kind of sent me down like this little pathway of like, maybe I want to get one. And so about last September, I think it was, that's what I did. I bought this Nikon F3. I don't remember how much I paid for it, not too much. I just got the camera body only. And then I didn't make a video about it for a while. I maybe made a couple like brief mentions to it, but then I made one piece about it, which I'll put up there as well. And I've not really talked about it much since. I kind of fell out of favor with it. Not for any like particular reason. I think I just started working on a couple of them. I was like, man, I don't really like working on them. Like, they're very complicated. I have one here I'm still working on because each time I think I've got it figured out, it decides to have another little gremlin pop up. So, still working on that. I returned to this not too long ago. I had the Contax S2 debacle, and I kind of fell back on this, and I picked it up, started using it again, and I was just like, this is just such a good camera. Like, this is just a really solid camera, really good experience. And I talk about this a lot, where I talk about finding the tools that inspire creativity within you. Like, you look at the camera sitting on the shelf, you're like, man, I really want to go shooting now. Or like, you're thinking, you know, the sun's gonna be up for about another hour, just got off work, I'm kind of tired, but I want to go on a little drive, maybe take some pictures. Like, what's the camera that's going to like push you over that edge to grab your keys, get in the car? For me, that's the Nikon F3. There's just something about the form factor, there's something about the mechanical build, there's something about all of the little elements that really make this something that I really enjoy using. And so for that reason, and for the year-ish anniversary of me owning this camera, I wanted to revisit it, talk about it a little bit more in depth, and yeah, just shine a little highlight on it, and kind of run through why I think that this is the best Nikon film camera. And I feel pretty comfortable in saying that. Everyone's gonna have their own opinion, and you're more than welcome to share that down in the comments below. I would love to hear it. But for me personally, I do think it's the F3, because there's very few cameras across all brands that I can just pick up and just be like, this is it. Like, this is it. This is good. So the Nikon F3 was introduced in 1980. It was in production from 1980 to 2001. It is the longest running Nikon SLR, and they made roughly 751,000 of them. What's interesting about the Nikon F3 is that it was still being produced, or while its successor, the Nikon F4, was being produced, and while the Nikon F5 was being produced, they were still making these. So that just kind of goes to show how popular it was. This is the first electronically controlled Nikon F system. Nikon F1 and the Nikon F2 were both mechanical, so this is a departure from that, requiring batteries to operate the shutter. It also features here the A, which stands for aperture priority, meaning you set this on here, and depending on what aperture you set it at, it will select the shutter speed at which to fire that will give you the correct exposure. How it decides that exposure is with a complex series of microcomputers within the camera, all that sort of stuff. But more importantly, it has a silicon photodiode with an 80% center weighted meter, and meaning basically whatever you point at, it's going to give you the exposure for that. However, it does keep in mind the ambient light around that. So you're not going to get strictly center weighted. You get kind of it has a preference to center weighted is what I'll say. It does have a metal horizontal traveling shutter, and that is one thing about this camera that is interesting, because it kind of cripples it a little bit in terms of its flash sync speed. Other cameras that Nikon were making at the time utilized copal shutters, the vertical traveling, horizontal, vertical, vertical traveling, vertical traveling copal shutter systems, which could achieve faster shutter speeds, faster flash sync speeds. This, however, did not have that. Feel however you want to about that. I kind of like it because I do think it kind of harkens back to the older SLR systems, while also adopting much more of the modernization of the platform, i.e. battery controlled, stuff like that. This does take two 1.5 volt batteries, and that's about it. It's a really great camera, but let's go over some of the design features. Here on the top, we have our exposure compensation. By pressing down on this and moving this up, you can select whether you want to push a couple stops or pull a couple stops, if that's your thing. If not, set it just on 0. You can move the ASA by this little dial here, lifting up and rotating around. This one is a little broken, my personal one, but there's this little tab here. Normally this would be like a little toggle. This one doesn't have it, so I just have to have tweezers with me at all times to kind of get in there if I need to. But I also don't really view that as a detriment personally. Part of the experience. Over here you got the shutter speed dial, as I mentioned, top speed of 1/2000 of a second. With the bulb feature, 8-second exposure. The dial does go all the way around, which I think is kind of nice. There is a locking mechanism here for your flash sync speed, for your auto, and any other speed you'll be able to just pull there. This is the self-timer operating mechanism there. You just push that out, and when you see the red dot, your self-timer will be initiated. It is a 10-second self-timer. Your on-off switch sits right there. On will expose that kind of white dot. Push that over, camera is off. Here's your double exposure lever. Move this over to this side, and you will stall out the advanced sprocket. Push it back in, it will re-engage. So if you're into double exposures, that's how you can do it. The advanced lever, I think, is just a work of art. It is quite literally one of my favorites. I think the form of it, just in general, fits really nicely within the camera. But it feels really good to advance. That's because there is a ball bearing system that sits underneath this for a nice smooth pull. And then you'll notice the shutter button sits in the middle here in this deep bevel, and flush as well, which I just think is great. This is a great feeling shutter button. I really do enjoy it. And I know I sound kind of crazy, I think, when I say, oh, this shutter button's great, but like, genuinely, if you've not shot a Nikon F3, just shoot a Nikon F3 and you'll know what I'm talking about. Like, this is the business. The prism here can be removed simply by pushing back on these, lifting up, and then you have what all of the cool people like, which is a nice look like this. So that way when I'm taking like kind of cool pictures of landscapes with expired film, everyone can see what I'm looking at, and then I can take a picture and get 1,000 likes on Instagram. You have your LED readouts for your shutter speeds and whether or not that's over or underexposed. And then you also have visibility for your aperture there, which I just think is great. I'm a big fan of providing all of the information through the viewfinder. There are multiple different prisms made for this camera. This is just kind of the standard one. It does feature a little lock like that, so if you're shooting like long exposure stuff, this can kind of prevent more light from leaking in, which is kind of nice. For now, I'm going to put it back on. And let's talk about the front of the camera here. We have a light system for the self-timer, as I previously mentioned. This is more of a stop down. This is a mirror up system if you need to do that for whatever reason. On this side, you have your lens release. Push down on this, rotate the lens the opposite direction because it's a Nikon. That's how they all work. You can pull the lens off and just put it back on by doing that. Over here you have a little cover for your sync port for an external flash unit, which is nice. You'll notice that there's no hot shoe on the camera. There is, however, this system, because there's an external flash thing that you can mount here, so that way you aren't hampered by needing to have a prism attached and they don't have to figure out how to run the hot shoe contacts to the prism, all that stuff. It simplifies it quite a bit. But you do have to use the flash sync port. Screw that back on. Another really nice feature just to kind of keep the camera front clean. And I want to point out this here. This grip is very subtle, but it's very present in usage, I think. It's just enough, I think, to grip onto. It's not so much that I feel like I'm a rock climber. And it's all kind of tied together by this singular red stripe. This would go on to become like the signifier for Nikon's like flagship camera systems. It all originated in this camera. That's because it was designed by a guy named Giorgetto Giugiaro. I think he made cars and stuff. Anyway, the dude designed this camera. I think he did an impeccable job. The grip is subtle. And then on this side here, we have this nice like slope down here for the strap lug. And just again, a nice subtle grip, but nothing too crazy. It kind of sheens up into the body here, kind of pinches down. I really like the look a lot. On the back here, just a little memo slot. We got the Nikon with your serial code number. Mine has 69 in it, so it's very funny. Haha, sex number. On the bottom here, we have kind of basic operation. This does have a motor drive unit that you can use.
3 accepts the Nikon MD4 motor drive that advances at an incredible 6 frames per second.
It is a very simple connection to the tripod socket there, and then to this here, which feeds directly into the film canister that you have and the contact points there. Sitting here is your battery well. Again, that takes 2 LR44 1.5 volt batteries, and here you have your rewind button. So when you're done shooting your film, you press down on that. That will disengage the advancable and you can rewind your film. I think that's about it. Very simple camera with a few step-ups in terms of functionality. Vis-a-vis, electrically controlled shutter, aperture priority, and a few other little details as such. Overall, what can I say about this camera that I didn't say at the beginning? I think it's gorgeous. I think it's a really beautiful camera. I do think it's kind of up there in terms of functional beauty. It could sit on a shelf, look absolutely gorgeous. It could be out in the field and still look very nice. I don't think it draws too much attention to itself. Like I said, everything about this camera is kind of subtle. It has the little red stripe. It has the slight grip. Even the f3 is kind of small. Like it's not popping out at you, hey, this is a fancy camera. Like it looks big at times, but I think compared to something like the f4, it's not that crazy. And then if you look at this compared to something like this, the Canon T90, night and day. This thing is massive compared to this. This camera did a very impossible thing in my mind, and that is it changed my opinion on Nikon cameras. Single-handedly, this f3, this specific one, changed how I felt about an entire brand of cameras. Now, I think that goes to show that I'm very biased, and I acknowledge that. I tried to in all my videos, but I am very biased, and the Nikons that I've seen are kind of the worst of the worst. But I had this big, like, mental blockage to using a Nikon camera, because all I could think back to was the nightmares, the garbage, the rust, the faulty shutters, the just randomly slipping advanced levers, the cauterized battery compartments due to battery shortages. All I could think of were these things: the malfunctioning shutter units, the fingers poked through the shutters. I've seen the worst. But this Nikon F3, I think, despite its few flaws, despite the patina, the dings and the drops and all of the little things, it just adds character to this camera, and it makes it the best, I think. I genuinely think that this is the best Nikon camera out there. For that reason, I did want to revisit it. I wanted to wax some lyrical, and also wanted to share some of the photos I've taken with this camera over the past year. It has been a great year because of this camera, and I look forward to many years to come where I can continue to shoot this camera, continue to use it, and continue to capture the wide spectrum of memories that life has to offer with this camera, because I know for a fact that it will be there because it's a Nikon F3. So, thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it as always. Be sure to leave a comment down below with what your favorite Nikon camera is, or what your favorite camera is in general. If there's any camera that you want me to revisit, let me know as well. Like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future videos. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.